it gonna do?
Better. Stronger.
Son of a bitch.
Faster.
Oh, yeah!
All right, yeah. So another great weekend at Super Training Gym here in West Sacramento. And I had these guys come in. This is my buddy Fernando, who is to the left of me, and Brandon, who is to the right of me. And these guys both weigh in over 400 pounds. They need to lose weight. They want to lose weight. They are my new, I guess I'm going to call them the carb warriors for now. So what I'm doing with these guys is they are going to start on a war on carbs. And there's also a couple other people here in the gym that also need to lose weight. Russell, obviously, you've been on a journey for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what I was saying is that what I want to eventually do with these guys is start up like a little group, which I already started with just them two. And then whoever else wants to join in, like, hey, do you want to join in? I'm just going to give you tips once in a while, and we're just going to keep each other accountable. Hey, bro, you're going to be at the gym, that kind of thing. So I'm just starting up like a little text group with some people that I think could really use the help. We have another guy here that definitely needs to join in on it as well. And it's just about getting people to basically apply everything that Mark and I have been doing over the last couple of years, and actually being able to use it on people that really need it and really want it, you know. So we get a lot of people in here that are power lifters and they're trying to get stronger, and that's great to help, you know, a 15-year-old kid get stronger for football, or to help my phone's ringing, or help somebody get, you know, help somebody get better at football, or to help somebody, you know, lose weight or whatever it may be. I think that that's great. But what's really great is when you have somebody who's like gonna have some severe issues down the road if they don't fix this now. And these guys they're both young, so they're pretty healthy, but they're in that spot where, like, if they could do something now, and the rest of their life can be incredible.
Before the mechanical failures start.
Yes.
Before they start hurting their joints.
Yeah.
Before
Before everything started, because they move pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, things like that. And like I said, we have another guy that I think John's friend Jamal, I think, should definitely join in too. He's not quite as heavy, but he definitely needs to lose like 100 pounds, you know. But I think that if all these guys doing this now can sort of join together and form a little team, that just helps everybody, right? And so I'm trying to just get people together, get people talking. If you see me here in the gym every single weekend, all I'm doing is introducing people to each other, you know, just like, hey, meet this guy, meet that guy. I introduce everybody, make sure like everybody, you know, everybody talks to Andre, and everybody meets Andre and knows that he was a powerlifting champion. I'm always just promoting what we're doing here in the gym. This that I just brought up, these are just some things I posted on Instagram this week. This was a really, really good friend of mine, Shad. Shad died in a accident out in by Venice Beach, Marina del Rey. He was swimming with his young kid. This is like they just had reopened the beaches from COVID. They opened them for like one weekend, basically. And he went out there swimming. Him and his son got caught in a riptide. And while he was yelling to the lifeguards to save his son, which they did, Shad ended up drowning and he died. And this guy was a really good friend of mine, and probably the closest to me out of the Bell brothers. But this is a guy that had a great impression of Mad Dog. He used to always come up to me and give me the whole Mad Dog impersonation, because Mad Dog would get so excited. He would stutter, you know. He goes, shh, Shad, you're not going to believe what, you know, and blah, blah, blah. And he would get all this. He'd always be on something. So he'd always like talk a million miles an hour, and he'd get like stuttering and stuff like that. And he could just do it perfect, where like literally sounded like Mike, you know. And he wrestled as Crime Time in WWE. That was his gimmick. He was kind of like a 50 Cent looking character, which I thought was really cool. He'd wear like a, you know, wife beater tank top and jeans and work boots. And he had a tag team partner, and he used to like steal other people's belts and do all these like, very stereotypical things, which was funny because a lot of people got mad at Shad for doing that gimmick. But in Shad's mind, the whole thing was a goof.
Mhm.
It was a goof on the stereotype. Like, oh, they're gonna stereotype us. I'm gonna play right into all those stereotypes.
Mhm.
And so that was sort of his little gimmick there. We had some fun last night. We were just talking about this infamous slap. The reason why I was asking you, just really quick, we won't go over this too much because it's going to be everywhere, but you saw this slap, Will Smith slap Chris Rock in the face during the Oscars. I asked you if you thought it was fake.
Mhm.
It looks real. Like, I watched it a million times, and it looks like they make, if you look at the video, here I have a video up, it looks like there's contact, right? Boom. I mean, but you're also talking about professional actors.
Right.
You know what I mean? And Chris Rock, like, he doesn't do anything. His arms are down.
Right.
Usually you would like touch your face.
He
Like,
didn't.
usually if somebody smacks you, you always see this. I mean, like, I read this on Twitter and I was like, oh, this person's right. I think it was a woman that said it. Like, if you ever get smacked or hit in the head or something, you usually like feel it. And she's like,
So that was a work.
his hand. I don't know. So now click on CNN's coverage, right? And this is what all the media has been saying. Read what that caption says there.
Will Smith appears to strike Chris Rock on Oscars telecast.
Yeah, appears. And that's kind of the way it's been worded in the media.
Interesting.
I probably listen to Adam Curry's podcast too much.
That's such a great.
I'm trying to deconstruct like every single thing I see in the media.
Deconstructing media.
Yeah, and you're like, oh, he appeared to hit him, but did he hit him?
Well, it's still so interesting, and unfortunately, I've lost all confidence in media. I no longer trust journalism for news.
No, and another thing is the Oscars were something that I used to really look up to, and I always would say, how cool it'd be to win an Oscar, and like now I'd probably use it for a doorstop. You know what I mean? Like there's no like, well, it's like I don't believe it, and like documentaries aren't real anymore. Like my art form is dead. You can't make a documentary anymore. Do you think any of these documentaries on Netflix are telling you like both sides of the story? There's nothing like that anymore. Like it doesn't exist.
Like
so
Sean Penn in the Ukraine right now working on a documentary.
Yeah, if I want to make another documentary, I have to make a documentary and figure out how to kind of put it out on my own. I think that's the only real route to go. I have a film called Meatheads about keeping meat legal. Keeping it around, and nobody wants it. And I'm trying to say, like, you're telling me that this is one of the most controversial subjects in the world right now. The fact that meat's going to be the next big thing. Like we just heard, gas. So it was what? COVID. Then it was gas. What's the next thing? Food shortages. Biden's calling it right now. We're going to have food shortages all around the country because of the sanctions we put on Russia. So we're going to have food shortages. That food shortages is going to definitely be, meat's definitely going to be a big part of that. And meat's been on the chopping block for quite some time. And I have this documentary that I want to make about meat. And it seems like nobody wants to hear it, right? So I'm kind of like, I wonder, And obviously, like, I want to explore both sides of it. I think while I love meat and I eat meat every day, I also think there's a lot of bad things about it that we can fix, or things that maybe I don't even know that maybe I should be exploring. What could we do better? How could we be better people? How could we be better stewards of this land that we were given? That's something that's really important to me. And so I don't know. It just seems like nobody wants that message to get out there yet. It's hard to say. Did they pass on it because I wasn't charismatic enough? Did they pass on it because my pitch wasn't good enough? Did they, or did they pass on it because of the subject matter? And it's always really hard to tell, So I'm not like, I just don't trust any media anymore, whether it's a documentary or whether it's anything, which is really sad.
Well, I mean, just for what it's worth, I was there during that pitch. It was interesting. You were charismatic. You were concise. They showed a lot of interest.
That was a different pitch. That was a newer pitch.
Okay.
To a different group of people.
Okay.
So let's hope that goes. That's something that's still, we're still waiting on that.
Yeah.
But if that goes, what's interesting is like they're kind of taking a chance with this, and I understand that. And I respect that. I think it's cool.
It's counterculture by the actual new terms, right? It's not this is counterculture. The culture wants to push towards veganism, right? I got advised that from a doctor.
Yeah, well, you know what? Like, there's this whole thing. It's really crazy going on that people are saying is going on, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's conspiracy theories and whatever." And it's like we're kind of losing what it's like to be a normal human. And like, yeah, Adam Curry was talking about this owning things. Like nobody wants to own things anymore. They rent them. We have this like company BlackRock or whatever it is, where you could put your house on the market. It'll be on the market for like 2 days now. Somebody will buy it right up, and it's usually like a Chinese company that's buying it so they can rent it back to younger people.
At the Great Reset.
That don't, and all that stuff is like, people think like, oh, conspiracy. It's like, no, it's not a theory. It's like, this is actually happening right before our eyes, and this is happening with a lot of things. Like, why is Bill Gates buying up all the farmland? I could be a conspiracy theorist and say what I think he's going to do with it, but like, I kind of know that he's not. He's definitely into fake meat, so I know that doesn't look good. So whether or not these things are actually happening right at the same time or whatever, who knows? But it's like, I question everything now, and I think that's how we should be looking at things. We should question everything. So did Chris Rock really get slapped? I don't know.
Yeah.
Who knows? It's actually, I thought in the first time I saw it, I thought it was like a gimmick because it sounded like a WWE punch. Like it looked like he did the stomp and the punch, like Triple H would do or something. But I don't know.
He looked incredibly uncomfortable afterwards, talking about the
my
wife's name out of your mouth. He
didn't
look like he was trying to smile, or
let's just say it looked real. It felt legit. So that's why, but I'm wondering why they're saying appears to strike him. Like, if they say Will Smith strikes him, are they going to get in trouble for like slandering Will Smith, who did strike him? You know what I mean? Like, what is the reason to say he appears to strike him? That's the question. What is the intent? Every single word that goes on the screen at every news network is very carefully chosen. They don't just have some like kid sitting there writing up. Like, you've seen how they write them. They write them like what they want you to think, So I don't know. Yeah, so this week was shocking for Mark and I, and, kind of sad. Louie Simmons, who basically was our mentor in all of this, died. We were not really close with Louie towards the end here, in the past, probably like the past 10 years or so. But he was a huge part of us growing up and learning about lifting and just like learning these rules of life. It's like, you think Jordan Peterson has 12 rules of life. How about a guy like Louie Simmons telling you, if you walk with the lame, you develop a limp, and he would just have all these sayings that he would just whip out all the time. That would be like really inspirational. You would say things like, this doesn't make any sense. And he says, the results will justify the method. And that was just the way he was. Like, he's innovated powerlifting in ways that no one else will ever be able to match. He's probably innovated powerlifting more than like anybody has innovated anything. Like, so if you look at a sport like bodybuilding, and people say, oh, Joe Weider, he invented the principles. And no, he really didn't. He marketed the principles. He didn't make them up. Louie made them up. So like, Louie was at a basketball seminar with a guy named Dick Hartzell. Dick Hartzell owns a company called Jump Stretch Incorporated, and they made these rubber bands to help basketball players jump higher. And Louie was like at this conference with these guys because he works with all these strength coaches. And he's like, I wonder if, you tied those bands to a barbell and moved the barbell faster, would that make the athlete faster, kind of thing, right? And he came up with this whole concept. He's like, well, because it's kind of like using a chain, which is another thing that Louie, I think, maybe either got from the Russians or he came up with himself. But basically, like, when people put chains on the end of a squat bar, you'll see that, right? And you'll see the chains will ravel up on the floor. They build up on the floor. And as they build up on the floor, that's taking weight off the barbell. And then the barbell's light at the bottom, and you'll drive fast out of the bottom, but then you have to keep going. It's called compensatory acceleration. You have to keep going faster. Like, so you're gradually going faster as the bar's going up, and it teaches you to move in a way that produces more force. right? And so that's all Louie was talking about. Like, how do we create more force? So a band does the same thing. A band works like a muscle. It expands and contracts. So when you push against the band it wants to pull you back more, right? So it's going against you. And the chain is doing very, very similar things. And they actually work in similar ways, but they also, like in a training, over the course of training, they actually, it's good to use both because they both kind of feel different. They have a different feel to them. The chains have more of this like kinetic energy that is like, it's all like shaky and weird and stuff. And then also with the bands, you can also use chains. So you can use bands and chains. And the chains tend to stabilize the bands a little bit and give you like just a crazy workout. Some of the best workouts I've ever had with Mark, we're doing speed sets with bands and chains. And just a testament to like how well this works. I used to work for WWE and I was a writer. And I worked, for Vince McMahon. And so we would travel around the country every single week. And for 6 months when I was working there, I wanted to keep my strength. I was over a 400-pound bencher, probably benching like 425 raw, like any day of the week. So, and this is like natural too. So I wanted to keep, back in the natty days, I wanted to keep that strength, right? Well, how can I keep that strength when we're on the road all the time? We're always different towns and I don't have anybody to train with. There's no training partners. So I can't lift heavy. So instead of lifting heavy, what I did was 225, which is 50% of my max, for 10 sets of 3. And I would just do the 10 sets of 3 as fast as you can. And then you rest like 60 to 90 seconds. Like you don't rest that much. And then you do another 3 reps and another 3 reps. And when you're that strong and you're like, oh, you're only using 225. Well, Louie's had guys working with speed, doing these speed benches. He's had guys that have done like 700 pounds and their working weight during the week was like 185. Well, how's that? How's that possible? Well, because these guys are equaling the same amount of force production with like the amount of time that they're moving the bar, like all these different things. And so you're working your speed to get faster at moving a barbell faster, because what Louie would say is like, if you're going to jump up onto a box, would you jump up slow? No, you're going to jump up fast. Otherwise, you're going to have bloody shins and land on your ass, So if you don't move fast, you're not going to move the weight. And that was the point of using these like chains and bands and things like that. And the other thing that was really fascinating is that he would come up with these things and he would write about them in Powerlifting USA. And before the internet ever even existed, I was a fan of Louie Simmons. So I didn't even know what an email was. I mean, I was in high school. It wasn't around. There was nothing like that. So you couldn't go on YouTube. You couldn't do anything. Mark was actually one of the first powerlifters on YouTube in 2006. When Mark started posting on YouTube, he was the first guy there pretty much from powerlifting that I saw. And the only guy for quite a while, for a couple of years. And then people go, how did he make so much money? I'm like, he was big on YouTube. And then he sold a product. And it was like Greg Doucette before Greg Doucette and before More Plates, More Dates and all, We started this gangster shit is what I always say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I feel like in part we did, both of us in our own ways of like, I was the first one to make a film about something like this,
Mm-hmm.
And then Icarus came along and won an Oscar. So yeah, I paved the way for Icarus. That's my only claim to fame. I'm kidding actually, but I loved Icarus. I thought it was cool. Except for I did think he threw the guy under the bus. I still think that he kind of threw the guy under the bus. But anyway, Louie Simmons was a pioneer. Louie Simmons was somebody that inspired me so much that I decided to put him in Bigger, Stronger, Faster. And if you could play this, we could watch this scene a little bit, and I'll talk about a little bit about filming this and what we did.
There's a gym in Columbus, Ohio, where the strongest guys in the world train. It's called Westside Barbell.
That's Chuck Vogel.
And this is where Smelly learned from his role model, Louie Simmons.
I've got a philosophy like many. When you go to war, you go to kill. You don't go to get killed.
There's nobody in this place that's not trying to be the best athlete in the world. Everybody here's trying to achieve an elite level of success.
Pretty much as you're a kid, you always want to be the strongest. I always want to be the strongest guy. And I still want to be that,
That was my hero back then, Chuck Vogel.
In
He's my
1959,
favorite.
my father showed me a book. It was about the Russians taking testosterone. So I said, well, what the hell? First chance I get, I'm going to do some of this. So I did. I've actually been on anabolic steroids for 36 years.
So that's interesting. We'll get to that in a minute.
Is it something I should be morally battling, or like, should I be fine with doing it?
Your morals are your morals, not mine. Who am I to judge you? And who are you to judge me? You want to be strong or you want to be weak?
But you can't be strong without doing steroids.
Can't be as strong as possible. If you want to reach the top, you're going to have to do it. Everybody thinks anabolic steroids is an easy way out. The people that train for anabolic steroids train way harder than people that don't. Regardless what people think of Barry Bonds, you can't take a bottle of testosterone, put on Barry's baseball uniform, and make him hit 700 home runs. Barry's got to go out, train, and hit the 700 home runs. But what if the scientists came up with something better than anabolic steroids? You see
And Louie
cows, you
leads
see
us
them
right
big,
into
powerful cows,
the Belgian Bull,
that they basically have
Belgian
changed
Blue
their
Bull,
genes.
which is
If they can-
basically the early version of what Piedmontese is doing now. So how interesting and ironic that all this shit blends together. You know, all the stuff that Mark and I have always been doing all kind of blends together in this weird synergy, you know?
When was this filmed?
This was filmed in about 2004 or 5. Like, the actual interview with Louie was filmed in, like, 2004. So,
You're such the sleeper OG, the common man, but anybody that knows this world
yeah.
knows that you and Mark have been there since
Yeah,
the
we've been
very
doing this.
beginning.
We've been doing this stuff. I mean, when the Belgian Blue Bull, when I went to talk to the farmer about the Belgian Blue Bull, I was telling him about how I used to eat meat and water every meal when I was in college. You know what I mean? So it's like all these things come back around, and I don't remember them until I see it, and I go, "Oh yeah, I have that original interview." And I remember talking to the guy about it. Like, when I was in college, I used to just eat meat with mustard like every single day. I would do that all day, every day. And so, yeah, we've been around the block a little bit, I should say. But Louie Simmons, like, talk about being around the block. Louie Simmons was amazing. He held all these powerlifting records. We can probably look him up and get his stats, but I want to say he squatted 900 pounds at over 50 years old, right? So he had all these powerlifting records. He was the sort of creator of the reverse hyper machine. He was the head guy over at Westside Barbell. And Westside Barbell was legendary. It was like, what Louie said that was amazing to me was that he said that he had all these guys from the same zip code, right? What are you looking up his career?
I'm trying to get his record.
He's saying he built champions out of all guys from the same zip code. So he didn't go out and recruit people. He just got guys in the area and he made them strong. They weren't strong. It says right there, 600-pound bench press, 920-pound squat. It's a little bit off, because all these numbers are back when they were using gear. And I don't mean steroids. I mean, they were equipped lifts. So while Louie squatted 900, and not to take anything away from him, he did it in a squat suit. You know what I'm saying? So it's still 900 pounds on your back. When Mark squatted 1,080, he did it in a squat suit. So it's the same as Mark saying the difference between Mark squatting 1,080 and Andre squatting 1,036 with no suit, pretty big difference. It's probably about, and Mark will tell you that too, it's like probably about a 200-pound difference, so, and just look at Andre's build compared to Mark. Like, Andre is just a thick human being,
Yeah.
And so if you look at that, I mean, that's what it takes to squat 1,000 pounds. Mark would probably just literally break in half if he didn't have a suit on, Yeah, or have to take double the amount of stuff that you take. So, speaking of taking stuff, Louie Simmons was saying, I've actually been on anabolic steroids for 36 years. So if you take 36 years and you add, like, it's been almost about 15 years since I interviewed him. Well, it's been more than that, because I interviewed him like 3 or 4 years before the movie came out. So say it was 20 years ago when I interviewed him. So he's actually been on anabolic steroids for about 56 years by the time he died at 74, right? So 56 years of steroid use, and probably pretty heavy steroid use. And he made it to 74. Not bad. I mean, what a run this guy had. So some people might go, oh, he was only 74, whatever. If you know Louie, he's glad that he went out when he did, I'm sure. I'm sure he was like feeling sick, not feeling good. He never wanted to be weak. His main saying was, weak things break. Don't be weak. And so I know Louie, I think the reason I identified him with him so much is he's just like Grandpa Bell. Our grandfather was like, hey, they're going to have to take a saw and cut my chest open, and I'm just not willing to do that. It's not worth, I don't need it. I'm out. And so he had a heart attack and died. You know, my grandfather was on the chopping block to have triple bypass surgery, and they told him they have to cut through his rib cage. And everything's like, I'm done. I don't, you know, he basically said he loved us and goodbye to us all, and he went out on his own accord. Now, I can't say Louie did that for sure, but knowing Louie, I'm sure, you know, he probably feels he had a good run. He had such a great surrounding. A lot of people would say that a lot of people will say bad things about him, say he's kind of like toxic and stuff like that. But to me, I don't think so. I think he was more like my grandfather, and I don't think my grandfather was ever toxic, and I would never call him that. My grandfather was just like a tough-ass old dude, you know? And I think Louie Simmons wanted things done his way or the highway. And so I think like, and he kicked a lot of people out of his gym. That's kind of like where you're off the team basically comes from, you know? He told Smelly, you'll never get on my board here. Like, you'll never make it up there. So don't even think about it. And that's all Smelly wanted to do was beat numbers from guys from West Side. And that's what drove Mark to like end up benching 854 pounds or whatever he did, was that one quote from Louie Simmons saying, you'll never make it up there. You're not good enough. And Mark's like, you sure I'm not good enough? But I think, why did Louie say that to Mark? Because Louie knew he was good enough. You know what I mean? It's a love. Like, that's the kind of love that guy had. It's a backwards twisted love in like, you're never going to do this.
That's like what tough love is. Is that tough love?
Yeah. Like, if I had the heart, yeah, like, you're never going to make it, Russell. Sorry. You know, just stop your diet now. Mm-hmm. And it really like upset you and got under you. You'd be like, man, he doesn't think I can fuck that guy, you know? Like, that's how you're going to think. But like, maybe it's just tough love when somebody does something like that, you know? So it's like, I think with Louie, it probably was, you know, like the idea was probably like, let me tell Smelly he's never going to do this. And he's the type of guy that'll go out and try to prove me wrong, you know? And in Louie's book, he says there's a couple people, you know, he basically wrote a memoir, you know, before he died, which is really cool. At the end, it says there's a couple people out of this that I'm really proud of. You know, Dave Tate and Matt Wenning and Mark Bell have all moved on to become amazing entrepreneurs and successful people. And while we haven't always agreed on everything, like, I love those guys. And like that kind of means a lot, you know? Mm-hmm. I don't know exactly what he said, but it was something along those lines. It was really nice. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, like Mark and him had a falling out. It's like the details aren't even important because it was kind of so silly. It was like over nothing. And so they kind of had like a falling out, but they, you know, Mark never, ever, I've never seen the kid hold a grudge on anybody. So it's like, for him, it was over like the day after it happened, you know, like, I got, you know, this thing with Louie, but it's over, you know? And who knows what Louie, it's kind of like Vince McMahon. Like, the more awesome somebody is, the more fights they get in with people. You know, you talk to people about Vince McMahon, like a lot of people that are really close to him really love the guy, but if you ever have to do business with him or something, it might be, you know, more difficult. And I think that's what, but Louie had a way with people, like a way of doing things. Like, we talked about the great Charles Poliquin when we did like a little tribute to him and posted the interview with him. And, you know, I love Coach Poliquin. I thought he was a badass. And I said to Louie, I said, hey, did Charles Poliquin ever come here? He's like, yeah, Charles Poliquin came here. He sat right there. And then he like walked away. And I'm like, yeah, but what did Poliquin do? Like, when he came here, he goes, he sat right there. That's what I said. He didn't do shit. Most trainers don't. The real people that come in here, like you guys, and you're doing it, these are the real people. And Mark and I were like, whoa, that's pretty deep. Mm-hmm. You know, that's pretty wild.
I heard an expression.
And not to take anything away from Charles, that's just what that's Louie's thought process.
Right.
You know?
I heard an expression over the weekend. Everyone goes into a new martial arts gym as a white belt or whatever you bring in.
Yeah, white belt mentality.
White belt mentality. So as far as probably Louie felt, he's like, he's new to this gym.
Yeah.
He might know his system, but this is our system.
Well, and also Charles might have been thinking, well, I don't want to mess these guys up, or I don't want to mess up what they're doing. I don't want to look stupid, you know, and that's probably more what Louie was saying, is like, he was afraid. And I think that's kind of a bad move too. I think like when you go to work with somebody, you should just hop in and work with them. Like, we had a barefoot running guy here. I haven't run in like 20 years. And Mark's like, just hop in, and the camera's rolling. I'm not going to say no. There's a camera rolling. I'm just going to do it. And I was way better for it after I did it. Now I'm out, you know, doing everything barefoot. You know, so it's like, what do you learn out of these little incidents where you're like maybe afraid to get out of your comfort zone a little bit? But you know, one of the things is like when we were filming for Bigger, Stronger, Faster, I wanted to make the point that like, look, there's a lot of people that take steroids, but there's a lot of people that take steroids and they just kind of suck. Like they take steroids, they just sit around, they don't do anything. They take steroids and they're trying to be more jacked to like look good at the beach, and they don't really even look that good. You know, there's a bunch of those people. But what about the real people that use steroids? What about the people that unabashedly use them and they don't care? They don't care what anybody thinks or what anybody says. Like, who are the rebels? Like, essentially, who are the only people that will talk to me in this movie about steroids? And guess who were the only people that would talk to me about steroids? It wasn't bodybuilders. It wasn't professional athletes. It wasn't actors who don't have anything to lose. It was powerlifters who are doing their sport 100% out of love, because before Mark Bell, there was not a cent to be made in powerlifting. Well, before Louie, actually. Louie started it, and then, you know, Mark followed that up. But, like, before Mark was, so, like, look at what Mark did and what Mark's paved the way for because of Louie. It's kind of amazing. Like, Mark started making wrist wraps, right? And then Mark started making wrist wraps for other influencers, and then other influencers started, you know, they grow out of it and they sell their own wrist wraps. And like, it's created this whole sort of like business model that like, hey, Mark Bell had a YouTube channel, blew up and did all this stuff. Like, you know, then Mike Rashid blew up doing kind of the same thing. And so blew up because doing the same, you know, doing those protocols. And it's just interesting how it's all evolved, you know, with the internet. And the thing is that the one thing that people will basically fault Louie for is that he didn't evolve with everything else. But like I said, he's like that old man, right? Like he's not going to really evolve. So when everything went to raw powerlifting and people stopped wearing squat suits and stopped using all that equipment, Louie really never changed much of what they did with their training. And, you know, would just kind of, I guess, blow things off to be like, you know, raw or equipped, what's the difference? Use all the same exercises and whatever. And he might have been right, but not enough people followed him on that path to see if he was right or not. A lot of people started finding faults with his system. So the West Side system, I can explain it really quickly, really well. The West Side system is a system of powerlifting called the conjugate system, which I don't know why it's called that. But anyway, that this system of lifting means that you do 4 days a week. It's just simple. 4 days a week. 2 days are upper body, 2 days are lower body. One upper body day is going to be a max effort day. So say the upper body day for max effort, you're going to pick one bench press exercise, but not necessarily a bench press. So say you're going to do, I'll do the Cadillac bar bench press, or I'll do an incline bench press today. And you'll work up to a max, either a max weight or like a max of 3 or 5, just depending on the week, you know? So you'll say, we're going to work up to like a max 5 reps on a incline barbell press. And I'm going to try to do, you know, back in the day, I think I might have done 275 or something like that. Maybe even up to 315 in my heyday with like an incline barbell press. So I'm going to try to do 3 sets of 5 with that as my top set. Then the rest of the workout's going to be some, you know, a couple dumbbell presses, some tricep push downs, maybe some diamond push-ups, and drag the sled a little bit, and I'm done for the day. And that was kind of his system, right? And then, so that would be a max effort day. Then on a speed day for the upper body, I would go in and I would strictly do bench press. So it's like anybody else, like you're practicing your craft that day, right? So that's kind of what he looked at it as. So you're practicing your craft, which is powerlifting. So on my upper body day, the only thing that I can practice my craft with is the bench press. So I'm going to bench, and I'm going to do 8 to 10 sets of 3 reps as fast as I can, using maybe bands or chains or just free weight. Doesn't really matter. And I'm going to do that with a short rest period. And the idea is to create more power, more force, more acceleration. And after you do that, which is actually not that hard of a workout because you're only using like 50%, you're using, he does these waves, and I think this is really cool too. He's the first guy I ever really saw like use these waves that were just so simple. And so the waves are like every 3 weeks on your speed stuff, you would change it. So like the first week you'd use 50%, the next week you do 60%, and the next week you do like 65%. And you just stay in those ranges. And then what do you do next week? Oh, drop it back down to 50. So you're never going like too hard back to back because he wants you to rest. He wants you to train hard, but he wants you to also, get the required amount of rest. And so after those like 8 to 10 sets of 3 reps on the bench press, you would go, and it's interesting because you do 3 reps for bench press and 2 reps for squats, and I'll explain that in a second. But after that workout, you just do the same thing again, like maybe some cable crossovers. It's like some other things for your chest, some things for your shoulders, some things for your triceps, whatever, and you're done for the day. So just more like accessory work, right? And then on the squat day, you would do 10 to 12 sets, so a little bit more volume rather than 8 to 10 sets, 10 to 12 sets of 2 reps on the speed day for squats. And you'd be squatting as fast as you can using bands or chains, usually onto a box. The reason for mostly using a box is that when you sit down at the bottom of a squat and you're wearing a squat suit, it's kind of like sitting on a box. So it really mimics wearing a suit all the time. It gives you the same kind of acceleration. Also, it teaches you to like shoot up off the box really fast and build more explosiveness, basically. And you can attach bands, chains, whatever to the bar to do that as well. And then after that, you would do all of your accessory work, maybe like a wide grip deadlift, maybe, whatever. And some of that stuff you go fairly heavy, but for the most part, after the first hard exercise, it's usually just like accessory work. And then on a max effort leg day, this would be the killer. This would be like where you go in one week and you're like, I'm going to work up to a heavy triple on like a trap bar deadlift. So I might do, work up to like a 700-pound trap bar deadlift on one day. Or I might use like the big plates, and work up to a deadlift of, how much can I do with these big giant plates? Something that's like a deadlift, but not necessarily a deadlift, or something that's a version of a squat, but not necessarily a squat. So how much weight could I do with the safety squat bar, for 3 reps or whatever? And so like you're taking, and then you're with these exercises, the fascinating things are constantly just changing that main exercise. So you're never doing like the same exercise 2 weeks in a row. Like one day it's a safety squat bar. The next week it might be a Duffalo bar. The next week it might be one of those weird cambered bars, but none of them are the same. You're always changing. And the way that you get good at the squat and the way that you get good at the bench press is from just a whole lot of practice. A whole lot of those 10 sets, those 8 sets. And then like the deadlift, they never really worked like that. And the interesting thing is at Westside, they didn't have great deadlifts. Like they didn't do the same technique for doing like, and deadlift you do 10 sets of 3 also or whatever. They only did bench and squat like that. And then they would figure that you got enough strength work in from all that, but they weren't always the best deadlifters. And maybe that's a reason for that. Maybe they didn't focus on it enough, something like that. But that's basically the West Side conjugate system. And it's like a really cool system where like, if you look at any other weight training system, it's really pretty boring. It's like, okay, I'm going to go in on a squat today and I'm going to do 5 sets of squats. And a lot of people do this squat and deadlift on the same day, which I just think is bonkers. It's kind of nuts. Like I have some girls that train here and they're awesome and they're really strong and they squat and deadlift on the same day. And I'm like, yeah, you could do so much more if you're not doing that on the same day. It's really hard to do that on the same day. And I get why. I get like, yeah, for conditioning and stuff, it might be good. But to squat and deadlift pretty heavy on the same day, it seems like the kids these days get their information off the internet and it's not always the best information. Like I just think that there's limits on your body and on your joints and things like that. And I think we'll see more of that coming up. But what I was saying before, I don't think I ever finished my story about staying strong on the West Side conjugate system. I thought I started there and then I went on this long diatribe about what it is. But basically when I worked at WWE, I just did the speed work. So every week I'd go in and I'd do 225 for like 8 to 10 sets and of 3 reps. And then I would do some auxiliary work and I'd be done, boom. And when I did that, I kept my bench press up over 400 pounds without ever touching close to 400 pounds. So it's like these techniques that Louie had, in my mind, were just amazing. And a lot of people would say, oh, well, he's only training people on drugs. And I was never on drugs as a kid. I was the strongest one around when I was a kid. Mark and I didn't do drugs, until Mark went to Westside Barbell. That's where it all started. He wanted to bench press 500 pounds in a meet, and Louie's like, well, you're not gonna do that natural. Mark's like, well, I'll do whatever it takes. So he was at that point. Time to cross that line.
And how long had he been training up until then? How many years?
Oh, he was training for like 10 years.
Unlike these kids doing it at 16.
More than 10 years. He trained for like 15 years because he was training since he was 12. So yeah, he's been doing stuff forever. And it was at Westside Barbell in Columbus, not literally at the place. I don't want them to get raided, but it was when he was living there is when he started taking stuff. And I remember his very first bench press meet, he went in and bench pressed 500 pounds, and Louie said he was real proud of him. I'm not sure if he was proud of the 500 pounds or proud that he went to the dark side. I'm not really sure. But, Louie was he was an amazing dude. Like, I just remember my favorite story about Louie Simmons is we were at his house, and his wife, who was just lovely, is named Doris. Doris is like this beautiful woman who is just a saint because she dealt with Louie every day, and Louie's kind of like a maniac, And they had this giant pit bull, right? And we were like totally scared of the dog, but you know how they're like, no, the dog's fine, And so I'm interviewing Louie, and Doris was being great to us. Hey, you guys need a water? You guys need this or that? And Doris is like, let me put the dog away. And Louie's like, nah, the dog's fine, let him sit there. So I'm in the middle with the interview with Louie, and I start looking over, and I just sort of see you get distracted when you're interviewing somebody. So you can't have anybody off screen doing anything, because when they do, it throws off the interview, it throws off the vibe, and all of a sudden you're paying attention to what's going on over here. And so I'm talking to Louie like I'm talking to you, and out of the corner of my eye, I see this dog, and it's wrestling with my producer, who's like a small girl. Her name's Tamsin, and Tamsin is wrestling with the dog because it was really cold out, so she had a scarf, and the dog had the scarf. And she's kind of fighting with it, and they're having a tug of war. And the dog is literally trying to eat her scarf, and it keeps eating her scarf more and more and more. And then finally, she's trying to yank it away from him, and then the dog flips out, it's went kind of crazy. And then Louie's like, Doris, he said, what did he say? So this was great, actually. So as all this is going on, they're having a wrestling match, right, with the dog. And the dog isn't fully barking. He's just kind of growling. And I'm like, oh, this is getting serious over here, right? And so I'm keeping my eye on it. And I say to Louie right at that point, Louie, do you think there's any such thing as roid rage? He's like, no, there's no such thing as roid rage. That's completely made up. Doris, will you get that damn dog? Get that damn dog out of here. Right after the roid rage. And then he goes right back to no, I don't think there's roid rage. I think that's something that the media made up. Just right back into the interview. He didn't just flip out on steroids. Mm-hmm. And it was so funny. And we just talk about that all the time. That was and the dog ended up winning, by the way. The dog ended up with, the dog destroyed the scarf. And then Louie offered to buy her a new scarf, which was.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah.
That's sweet.
He's like, oh, it looks like we owe you a new scarf.
That's kind.
But it was so funny because it was the perfect question, the perfect time. It was all quiet, Do you think there's any such thing as roid rage? And he's like, no. Doris, get that damn dog out of, Mm-hmm. And it was, that was Louie though. He was just an amazing dude. Mark and I used to joke all the time about kind of how nuts he was with numbers. He would know everybody's numbers. He'd be like, oh, Danny Blankenship, he bench pressed 525 back in 1985 at 198. I never seen anything like it. And then how do you remember that, dude? But he remembers everybody's numbers. He'll rattle off 40 lifters. You'll say oh, no one's really benched over 700. Have they? Oh my God. He'll rattle off 30 guys that did it. And you'll be like, how do you remember that? He just had one of those minds where he would tell you when you were lifting, he'd tell you what numbers to do. And he's figuring out your percentages in his head. So when he says, oh, your last week, because I remember it was always 67.5%. And you're like, okay, get out the calculator, figure out what that weight is. And Louie would just give it to you. He goes, that's 235. And you're like, how'd you figure that out in your head? And I don't know. He was just that kind of guy. He was somebody who inspired me from the age of like, I want to say I might be romanticizing this a little bit, but I think it might have been as young as 16 or 17 that I started reading his articles. Because my older brother, Mad Dog, he was like 2 years older. He was probably 18 when he went away to the University of Cincinnati. When he went to Cincinnati, I remember him coming back home, and he had this magazine. It was called Powerlifting USA. So I opened up Powerlifting USA, and I start flipping through it, and I start reading about this guy talking about like speed bench pressing, and it was Louie Simmons. And I'm like, this is so stupid. This guy thinks you're supposed to go fast. Like, you know, whatever. And then I remember every month getting to this article about Louie Simmons. I'm like, you know what's weird about this Louie Simmons guy is everything that he writes is like completely against what everybody else says. Like, is he just writing the opposite on purpose?
Being contrarian.
Yeah, to make people mad. Like, I didn't even know about that kind of stuff back then. You know, so I was just like, this guy, he's either crazy or he's on to something.
Right.
And that was the thing. Like Louie, he was on to something, and he really changed the way that we look at powerlifting. I mean, if there was no West Side Barbell, there'd be no Super Training Gym. There'd be no Chris Duff and Kabuki Strength. There'd be no like, not that all these guys trained under him necessarily. What I'm saying is like Louie innovated like this business mind acumen that all these guys have that are so great. If you look at like what Chris Duffin's done with his business, it's huge. And it's not like he came from West Side Barbell, but he comes from this whole group of people that have come along since Louie, who say like, you can make it in business. You can, like, look at what Mark did. Mark made a huge business out of this. You can make your own way. You don't have to like listen to anybody else. And that was the one thing that I really like about Louie. Like, to go back to, you know, even his issue with Mark, it was great. It was like, it was over the fact that they were modifying Louie's system. You know what I mean? They like, don't modify my system. This is my thing. And so I actually really, really respect the fact that he was like that. You know, that they have somebody that's so strong in their convictions, that they'll fight for it even if it's wrong. You know, and that it's like, it's interesting because that's like the criticism that he gets is like, well, maybe Louie was too hard on people. Maybe he was, you know, but like, that's also what makes you love somebody like that. You know, what makes somebody like that?
Passion.
Yeah. And also, you know, just the thing that like, let's just talk about fake and phony people, right? Like Louie was the real deal. There's nothing fake or phony about him. And that's kind of what's awesome. Like I remember Mark moved to Columbus, Ohio, and he went to breakfast every day with Louie Simmons. And most people were just afraid to, you know, and Mark just said, oh yeah, you know, like Louie was that type of guy. He didn't know Mark from a hole in the ground, but Mark wanted to learn. He wanted to help Mark. And he said, yeah, just show up at Bob Evans and we'll have breakfast. We'll talk about it. So Mark just showed up every single morning, had breakfast with him. And people don't realize like things like that are actually not that hard to do. Some of these like really top people that are at the top of their game, like they're bored too. They don't have people that can connect with them on the way, you know, the way that Mark could connect with Louie. There's not a lot of people that connect in that way. And so when you have like a really high thinking guy who's like, everybody else thinks he's kind of crazy. I don't want to deal with Louie today. There's other people like Mark that'll go there and soak up all that knowledge, you know, get all that. And I think that that's really cool too. Like that he was like that. He was down to earth. The very first time Mark ever called the gym, Louie picked up the phone and said, West Side. And Mark's like, I'm looking for Louie Simmons. This is him. That's how cool he is.
Yeah, that's really cool.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
But first of all, he had an old school phone, a rotary dial, you know, so he picked it up and he's like, West Side, you know, that's how old school he was. Like, you know, we can just kind of end it on that because I think that sort of says it all. He's a guy that picks up his own phone calls, which, you know, nobody does nowadays.
Right.
You know? Now they shun you if you text them.
Only if it's for.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's it. That's our little tribute to Louie Simmons. Boy. He'll be remembered for centuries to come.
He's trying to have another kid, so he decided that this is going to be his last meet that he ever takes anything. How do you think that'll affect his lifting?
It affected somewhat, but once he tapers off and has the child, he can go right back on.
But he doesn't want to go back on him. His wife doesn't want him to be on it at all ever again.
The death of Smelly.
You think so?
Smelly will go back on.